Everyone thinks that's innovation, and that almost never happens.
When the project is finally catching on, you change power.
It became known as the place where our dreams went to die.
What is an ambiguous brief?
Part of design is you're a reluctant optimist.
To have different conversations, to ask maybe tough questions.
Government's a black box. What you're saying is dangerous, in my opinion.
This is Create What Matters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Create What Matters. I'm Leti.
And I'm Ale. Welcome to one more session. Together, we have created this space for people who are restless, curious, nonconformist, and we bring you a very interesting session today to bring more content for inspiration and thought-provoking questions.
Today, we're talking about impact beyond profit, looking at success as more than just making money.
Our guest today is Scott Paterson, a creative leader with 30 years of experience who helps organizations design new ways to solve city challenges.
Scott founded Adventure Ventures. Thank you so much for coming, where he helps organizations explore future possibilities through design and forward thinking.
Scott, welcome and thank you for being here with us. Your work has been recognized by the Whitney Museum. You have taught at Parsons, California College of Arts, and are a guest lecturer at IDEO Business School in Barcelona, amongst many other things. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Create What Matters, and I want to start with a question that is very much in the alley of designers in general. I know that you're not a design by maybe education first, you are an architect, but that's your background. Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure that you've read enough books and you've studied design enough to have your own definition of design, because I know that that's usually a heated topic amongst peers, I would say. So what is your definition on design and what's your take on it?
It's a never-ending thing, so I avoid that. and because I'm very much a generalist now, I think of it as it's a kind of intentional creative expression to depict a way of life, whatever it is you're designing. It could be a culture, it could be a product, it could be a digital service, but embedded in it intentionally or accidentally is some way of being in the world. Mm-hmm. And different schools of design prioritize different things to express those. So it's very general, but I think every discipline then focuses on how to design this thing versus anything else.
I think you talked about culture as well.
Yeah.
Coming from both tech startups and governments, what's one thing that design can bring to all settings, no matter their size and no matter their complexity?
Pretty much like where we're sitting now, it's all been designed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably, even when we go outside, the park across the street is also artificial, and then it's been designed to some degree. The tree's natural, let's say. But we shaped it. So anything can be shaped. And it's our awareness of the biases behind why is it shaped that way that is an opportunity to question, can it be something else? So it doesn't matter what organization it is, city or otherwise. Mm-hmm. The challenge is who's behind why it is the way it is now, and are they open to considering something else?
And you've also helped tackle problems in urban or surroundings in cities, mm-hmm. Different challenges, using different design methods. Could you share some examples of those experiences? I remember when we met, you have always also been involved with different organizations, local communities, to tackle and observe different local problems and find ways of tackling them. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a big topic. But the real concentration on it started when I went to Singapore to work with their Department of Labor. It's funny, it's called the Ministry of Manpower, which is MOM. Mm-hmm. But at the time, it was quite a paternalistic organization. Mm. And, well, just historically, as a way to modernize, Lee Kuan Yew had a kind of uncle, grandfather, paternalistic attitude about improving things, sometimes for good, sometimes not. And in that work, learned there's a lot that design can do to improve how things work. They had an inverted problem in that they were too efficient, mm-hmm. that there was an expectation of expediency. Things would be fast, mm-hmm. but only if you fit what was going to go through the process smoothly. Mm-hmm. if you were not in any small way, suddenly it was like a Kafka experience. So when it broke, the facade of sleek modernism disappeared immediately, and it was like you were in rural Malaysia again. And so in that work, met a lot of incredible people, a lot of interesting models of people who are in government, come from a good college, they're well compensated. And I thought to myself, as a designer, where do I want to be spending my talents? Here? Because there's a debate about the US, Canada versus Singapore, and who's doing it better. And I thought, okay, I should go back to the US and try and improve things there.
Yeah.
So when I returned to the US, my focus was more on public sector and then myself being involved wherever I lived in the local political environment.
And that has been your experience also in Barcelona, as I recall it.
Yeah, even last night I went to the local city council meeting in Gracia. Even though I don't speak or properly understand Catalan, they subtitle as best they can on a projection what people are saying. And then I had a Catalan friend who on the phone was giving me a kind of summary of the discussion. But I more wanted to see the theater of the thing. How is it conducted? How are they expressing themselves? How is the nonverbal expression being conveyed? How equitable is it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How are each of the political parties expressed? Or are they? These kinds of things. Is it only through language that you experience them? Blah, blah, blah. So I was super curious to see what that was like versus what you see in the movies or what you might guess. Like government's a black box. Like most people have no idea what happens in any of those buildings. We understand businesses generally. There's a person who runs the business, a bunch of people who make the business. Like there's metaphors we have. Government, not so much.
And how was your experience in working in so many different cities around the world, but also like going from government to going to public sector to going to companies? What do you see are the main challenges in running things when it's like public oriented versus when it's business or profit oriented? And what is this black box, and what are the things inside this black box that you can say that are patterns around the world, and what maybe culturally are different? Because you've also been in Brazil, so you know a little bit of all types of chaotic existences. And I know my country very well in that sense. So I know that it's very chaotic.
It's just a great reminder that these two things are symbiotic. So I think people forget that the state or government initiates a lot of things, like either through funding or subsidy. They try to incent some kind of exploration. Went to the moon, for example, was a government initiated thing. And in healthcare in many different places, but it's somewhat invisible to us often because it exists within this sort of black box. And unless you're super active, you might not be aware. And it happens at least a decade prior to us seeing anything, seeing any manifestation. So we are not aware, and then it makes it easy for the private sector to criticize and manipulate our understanding of that. But they might be able to do what they're doing because of that initiation. And then after that, essentially there's like carrot and stick. So private sector is great with carrots, incentivizing behavior through new opportunity and offerings. And the government essentially is managing the bottom and trying to incent, like a teacher, manage the bottom and incent opportunity growth. And then the private sector just tries to run, and government tries, depends on where, some kind of playing field. And this is what you see are all the controversies around the world. You can kind of boil it down to like, who's doing what? Who's trying to manipulate how things are going? And if you simplify it to that. Another one that I found pretty fascinating is justice or liberty. After, I think, Trump's first election, Van Jones did a tour around the U.S. and asked people, how do you feel about the priority in your life of justice, like something for everyone, or personal liberties? And just talk about how those two things show up in your life. And depending on how you respond to that, if justice is more important, then you might want more managing the bottom so that it's, equal playing field. If not, you want liberty, then you want, as minimal government as possible. And that is a way that removes all of the negative name calling, etc., that keeps us away from each other.
I often think of not just trends, but also influences in general when we talk about government structures as us being in the center, so human life being in the center, kind of like a turning wheel that spins super, super fast. And then we have communities around it that spins a little bit faster. And then we have businesses which try to understand what are the behaviors that we're doing and try to keep up with that. So businesses are always trying to mimic and are trying to understand the community and the people inside it. And then around it, you have sometimes even things like academia, studies, and other researchers who are trying to research and understand all of that. And on top of it, you finally have the public sector and then the governments, which spins very slowly. So I know it's not as linear as that, but for me, it's a way of thinking of how things are run. Because we do a lot of projects that take a lot of time to be implemented. I am now starting a project that started 2 years ago. And we're only going to see the impact in 3 years. And I think sometimes, even as a business person, you don't realize how long it takes for you to actually see impact on the ground. And another thing that we don't realize is the time it takes for things to change actually sometimes also depends on who is running. Because depending on the terms that you have, so for example, in Brazil, it's 4 and 4, just like the US. When the project is finally catching on, you change power. And that changes completely the dynamic of what's going to happen. So I think, I don't know if I already gave this example here or not, but we worked with gestational weight gain, and we did charts for gestational weight gain that goes to the Brazilian health care system, which is free, not like the US, but. And then we did something
I'm also Canadian, and I live here now.
I know. It's just that we were talking about. Absolutely don't.
We can criticize the U.S. healthcare problem.
Okay. And then it's something that every child that goes to Brazil uses it. And we did a huge study on design colors because colors is very important. Colorblind people don't see necessarily certain types of colors, and also because it had to be photocopied. So it wasn't just something that was digital, it was something that was also physical. And it would be sent to some municipalities, and some municipalities in Brazil are very small, so you just receive one, and you have to photocopy it multiple times. So it also had to be photocopy proof. And then we tested it, we had to go around searching for a photocopy space to do it and try it, blah, blah, blah. When the project finally came out, it was when the Bolsonaro government was starting. And I don't know if you remember this or if you recall this, but Bolsonaro is very keen on Brazilian flag, like the colors of the flag.
And everyone wore them.
And everyone were wearing them, so it was green, yellow, and blue. And so they changed all of the colors for those colors, which are not accessible at all. Because they wanted to have this statement of the country taking back their own colors. And I'm like, this is just the wrong place for you to be political about something. And then all of that study just like completely goes to waste because your project was not published in time enough in a way for you to be able to actually do it. When the Lula government came back, we were able to like send a note in and ask for them to change it back. And then they did. But it's just one of those things that I usually say we work a lot with data solutions. I talk a lot about data solutions in the wild because if we do something that's going to scale in a city, scale in a region, municipality, or even like a country, it's out of your hands. People are going to take it and they're going to use it. And you're just going to be like, this is not mine anymore. I don't control any of this. And this is yours now. After this long story, do you have any examples of like a project that maybe you were doing for a city or for a space that at some point people just took it over and they were like, it's just like completely changed the way that they worked with it, or even like the meaning that a project had in the beginning?
Took over. I would have come in after that had been happening.
Okay.
So we would want to understand the motivations of that. So when you're describing that story, I'm like, that's a classic example of like a few people maybe innocently thinking it would be good. Like they would, this is boring. It's because it's just black and white.
No, it wasn't black and white. But
or
anyway,
minimal color, whatever.
Yeah, it was.
They made some assessment of their own. And it's very easy, especially if it's a bigger thing like this, to lose sight of why are you doing it? Yeah. And they think it's harmless. It's such a common thing, harmless, just to do that. And a lot of work is essentially a series of Band-Aids or harmless things, but like maybe 20 of them accumulate over time and they're of enough impact. It's a kind of accidental impact. Then they wonder, why is this not working?
It's a snowball effect, right?
Yeah, and so they forget what was the original intent.
And how has design influenced your work, the work that you do with cities, or when you sit down in the city halls and are looking at these problems from that observer eye and looking at the way it works and trying to understand this black box? What do you feel, and what is your take on design? What would you say would be, do you think it could take a bigger role in the mindset and in the mentality that people approach?
No question it can. I do think the thing I most often see designers need to be teamed with, okay, for sure it's economically minded, not so much business, but the economic side of a business mind. If you're an entrepreneurial designer, maybe you'll be okay.
Okay.
But having that economic mindset of understanding business models, margins, etc., is pretty important. The other might be like legal. It's such an other, they're both interpretive languages, they have their own jargon, mindset, etc. But those three are a kind of perfect storm of understanding what's driving anything we're looking at. Because laws usually are limitations on what you see out in the world, and or economic drivers, right? Are incentivizing more or less of a thing, and then it looks like it looks maybe because of design. But often, for example, the price of a thing will be a bigger driver of its success than its like radius, sadly, in some cases. So being humble to that and then teaming with that makes what you're able to do, the place at the table you're able to have, much different.
Yeah. And changing gears, now that we have talked about design, if we jump into talking about innovation, I would like to know, throughout your career, you've worked on many different city projects. And you also have one related to what you did in Gainesville. And the project is called Department of Doing. What was the project about, and what can governments do? Because this one is related to putting people first in their approach. What can you tell us about that one?
It was an ambiguous brief.
Okay.
Luckily, prior to that, I'd also had an ambiguous brief. And so...
What is an ambiguous brief? Give us an example of what an ambiguous
what should we be doing?
Oh, okay.
Like that. You have a month. What should we be doing?
And there was like no...
Something like that.
Not even a metric or a goal.
No.
No points, nowhere. Like,
no.
Help us we don't know.
No, but I'm like, couldn't be more comfortable in such a situation.
In the unknown.
Yeah, when they don't even know what questions to be asking themselves. I don't know, because of the being a generalist and being... I think we'll talk about this in a minute, but I'll just bookmark these for later. Like being curious and critically minded, I think two of the like secret things you cannot not have, can explore an enormous amount. And so essentially there was a question about, so this, I guess there's a good story around business, law, AKA policy, and design. So what's the role of like city government in influencing the future of the city? As you might imagine, like it's loaded, loaded with bias, loaded with racism, loaded with different prejudices against like, you're new to the town or you're not, or good old boy club or whatever it is, gaining permission to even allow that conversation to come up is a thing you can design. And if you don't, nothing different will happen. So finding out that that's the case, some of that's anthropology, ethnography, provocation, but design, if you're a kind of empath who has a design skill, there's a way that I don't know how much we'll go into futures, but like one of the interesting roles of futures is getting people who may or may not know each other look at things that are influencing both of their futures as a way for them to meet. It gets to this thing about the justice, liberty. It's changing the vocabulary to create a common ground to talk about difficult topics. So finding what some of those neutral framing allow you to understand what's going on, who's driving these different things.
For sure.
So the Department of Doing had to do with, I remember we had some slide, there was a, I think, monthly or bi-weekly Friday, help us, like if you had a business idea, you could come and meet with all the various people in the city hall who would essentially approve this or help you with your business plan. But it became known as the place where our dreams went to die because essentially everyone went in from the city, more or less well-intentioned, but all said why things won't work.
So it was a system of.
But they thought that was helpful.
It was kind of like a complaint sector and complaint space.
The most common thing would be there's no shortage of ingenuity and entrepreneur spirit anywhere. Anywhere.
That's a good way to put it.
But you might not recognize it as that.
Yeah.
But when you do recognize it as that and you want to foster it, you need to understand what are they trying to do and what help do they need.
Yeah.
And sometimes cities are poor at that. And so they would judge the person, well, that mechanic shop's never going to see. Have you seen their yard?
Oh, wow.
So there are a lot of prejudice and a lot of biases. So interesting.
I mean, it exists in the private sector as badly as it does everywhere.
Yeah. But in this case, you're here to support those dreams or support these people or enable them. So
government's more there to just don't break the rules. Let's just manage the bottom means keeping illegal things from happening.
Okay.
Right? And to the degree to which they are enabled, have agency, incent new things to happen. But a lot of the energy is around protecting things, doing things for the common good, which sometimes or often puts a kind of, I'm not a libertarian by any stretch, but there's a way in which these policies are written where both sides are poor at communicating their intentions. So the entrepreneur saying what they want to do versus the person who writes the policy. For example, in a different town, everyone thought the city planner was anti-business.
Okay.
And it was no, I just don't want constant rollover in the restaurants. I would like, us to have restaurants that last a long time. Great.
Nothing wrong with
everyone
that.
wants that.
Yeah.
But is that written anywhere? No. Does anyone know that about that's why you say that? No. Okay, so then you need anyone who wants to start a restaurant needs support to understand beyond the regularly available things. What are you going to need to succeed?
And how to be sustainable over time.
You see ghost kitchens now. Allow you to experiment with your restaurant idea or pop up, blah, 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 blah. These kinds of things help entrepreneurs, find out, actually, maybe I'd rather just be a caterer.
Yeah. These different systems that, they can explore and discover these new ideas.
All of that's design.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where do you see today, and what does innovation in cities mean to you? No, that's a big one. I think that everyone, also I come from an innovation background, and I think that that's something that also I've discussed many times. What is the meaning of it?
But let's talk about that for a sec, because I think it's helpful to have. I remember for me when I started at IDEO, I think around that time, just by chance, there's and we can put a link to it. I assume it's still online. This incredibly helpful graph. I think it's still valid about the kind of innovation you're talking about. And you're right, it's used for everything.
Do you think it's lost its meaning somehow too?
It's lost its like accuracy.
Okay.
So there's essentially three kinds of ways to change what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you can like incrementally improve, which is more optimizing.
Yeah.
And it's generally what business is always doing.
Yes.
And depending on what that is, that would be more successful with Six Sigma type process. I wouldn't consider that innovation per se.
Okay.
You're improving, but it's really optimizing something you're doing. And most businesses should do that anyway.
And it's kind of what we're doing with technology nowadays. We're mostly
lot.
optimizing. Yeah.
And
like if you
then-
take iPhone, for example, in the last years, it's basically optimizing the same product in a way. Not really in a few things maybe, but...
Well, okay, let's get into the second one,
Okay.
which might be also that, which is you're trying, if you make a little bar graph
Yeah.
and then this is your customer and this is the thing you offer, it's like, is it a new thing to the same customer?
Yeah.
Or a new customer to something you already did?
Yeah.
That's called evolutionary innovation.
Yeah.
The risk is you don't know how to do the new thing very well,
Yeah.
whatever the new part of your business is, or you don't know that market well enough.
Yeah.
So that's where you might fail. But a lot of tech companies, when you try to grow your market share, you're doing that, essentially. You're not really optimizing anymore, I would argue. If you're trying to expand where it is or scale up or whatever, you've moved
Okay.
into that one. The third one, which is like moonshot, is revolutionary. You're doing both a new thing to a group of people you don't know very well.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks that's innovation, and that almost never happens. Never. You're like lucky if you succeed in that space.
Yeah.
But almost all the clients I've worked with start there, and we're like, not going to do that. You don't have a track record of doing that, so we don't want to do the incremental.
And also, like, it takes so much time for innovation sometimes to actually come, especially when you're talking about cities, hardware, things that are, it's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of investment and money. So it can take a long time for innovation labs. Yes,
It can take an hour.
No, if you're talking about processes, yes. Not if you're talking our software, yes, but not hardware necessarily. It can take an hour for you to develop, test, and run something in innovation. For me, okay, so here's where we develop.
In my opinion, you don't need that. If you haven't proved by then what this is, then you're sunk. I think you need to show within, a week, a day. You can give someone the idea of the kind of change you're talking about.
Yeah.
You mentioned like losing sight of metrics.
Yeah.
So if you set up this thing of like, we're going to show you what an hour's worth of doing something differently is, what it can be like.
Yeah.
And then if you do like the lean method in 1 week, you see what can be accomplished. After that, it's like executing on it or scaling that thing up, which is utterly a different thing.
Yeah.
But it's helping people understand how different it's going to be and what should we be looking for in that difference, and or the resistance, or the like, they're going to change the colors on us, kind of whatever, as much as you can anticipate some of those things happening.
I absolutely disagree. And I think that's great. For me, honestly, I like the definition that it is something that makes a change and it's like the new thing that actually creates impact and change. And depending on what you're talking about, you cannot see the change, as we said, if you don't put it into practice. So I think conceptually, what you're saying, yes, I completely understand. You can do that in a week. You can do that in a month. But there are things that you need a lot of research and a lot of investigation for you to actually be able to prove that that is something that is achievable. And then those cases are cases for me that it's very beautiful from a design perspective or innovation perspective to talk about the concept and how the system could change if we were to implement it. But for me, it depends on the success metric that you're putting here. So for example, if you're saying that you are generating an idea that could potentially change the system that you're working with, and that is your success metric, like how many different types of points or how many different people you can impact, potentially you can create a simulation to do it, you can whatever. I think that that's a stage of it, but that's stage one. I think that for me, I actually consider it an innovation. And after many years of seeing it, is when you see it in action. As I said, like when people use it, when you actually see it working and what people have done with it and how you change the market around you and how that shapes our reality and even our perception of things. It can be in a micro space or it can be in a macro space. But I wouldn't say that unless you're talking about a process, innovation process, or maybe a small software that escalates super quickly. So something that escalated quickly and changed our reality. Instagram, for example, for me, that was something that was incremental in a way. But in terms of process and in terms of design process, it really changed the way that we interact with things. The whole scrolling down forever, for example, and that was something that Facebook already had, but the way that Instagram implemented it, it changed the way that we interact with things. And that's a type of innovation for me. But we only see the impact and we only see it happening once it's already scaled. So I understand what you're saying more from a conceptual perspective, but in a practical one.
Yeah, but you're describing, you have to be, what you're saying is dangerous in my opinion, because you're talking about...
But innovations are dangerous.
Okay, endless scroll was an unintended consequence. He didn't know. The guy now is begging mercy for having created it.
Yeah.
And that's like societal change.
I know.
Nobody can anticipate or do that intentionally. That's like an unknown.
Yeah.
So we're not even talking about that. I'm talking about if you want to see something different, I cannot hold the promise or delivering the promise of anything like what you're saying, because it'll never happen. No one will ever bite on that. You need to show as quickly as possible to mitigate risk and fear how this thing is evolving and changing. The faster you can do that, like I said, the best evidence of the future is just to create it now. And so whatever you can do in the next hour, the next week, to show that you have some levers and are anticipating things that are evolving. And they're like the good news is it's easier than ever to do. So the tools and everything else are like easier and easier and easier for these things. My really strongly held belief, which I think is why I'm pushing back, is like, if I cannot convince a large organization to just try to do this one little thing, then conversation's over. They want to do some big thing, but if they go away and plan it, it will not ever be that. Ever.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to break this and we're going to change gears and talk a little bit about creativity and leadership, because that is a topic that we want to hear a lot from you as well. You talked a lot about also being super passionate about creating conditions for the best work to happen. That is fascinating because it talks a lot about humans and teams. What kinds of environments would you say help teams with different backgrounds to create their best work? You've worked in so many different cities, in public, private sector, in innovation, in futures. You're also a teacher, so you've seen, you have a lot of perspectives, right? And from many backgrounds and cultures. So what would you say would be the answer to having different and diverse teams creating their best possible work?
So one of them is this thing I just said, is like making the risk you are taking on palatable to everyone. One, because essentially you're asking everyone involved to do something different than they did before. So like not everyone's you. Like this is newish, right? But there's something in you that is natural and you're more comfortable or brave. There's something about you that you enter into it that other people don't. So that's one of your strengths. So understanding within a diverse team, they're not going to be those strengths for everyone. It's going to be something else. And as the leader of that team, it's like understanding what are those. So
it requires empathy, first of all, and to understand.
Empathy and curiosity about them. So I would always at IDEO, I don't know if it's a good thing, but take my team for drinks. And well, then I learned, I'm introverted. So I'm actually creating this priority of extroverted people in that environment. So I stopped doing that. But essentially it was why are you here? In a genuine way.
Yeah.
Like, why are you here? What do you want to get out of this? This is what I see as the creative brief, usually different than what is being said. Or opportunity, what gets you excited about, blah, blah, blah. And it might have to do with something different than their discipline's definition.
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, and what are you trying to do this not so existentially, but like over the next year, where are you in your career?
Yeah.
And is there something that we can do? Can I create the opportunity for that to come? So I had a teammate who is an artist, like properly, like practicing artist prior to joining.
Yeah.
And that showed up in a lot of the expression
Where
of
was
the
this?
project. It was a future of workplace for Nike.
Okay.
So it was, she's now a pretty famous muralist in the west of the US. And you can see that work showing up in these things. So for me, that's a creative challenge. And same with the client.
Yeah.
Who are you? Where are you in this? And what are you trying to do with this project? Because a lot of times in consulting, and if you work for a famous place, especially so, you are being brought in to either say something or do something they haven't.
Yeah. To have different conversations, to ask maybe tough questions, and the questions that they're maybe not daring to ask. And
Sometimes that, or I remember a financial client paid an enormous amount of money for us to make a point that he couldn't.
Oh, interesting. So
The
to bring
project
them-
wasn't going to go anywhere, but that was the goal.
Yeah.
I want to show to them this thing. Oh, okay. And so, but when we knew that, we're like, okay, we can really dial that in.
Yeah.
So the storytelling is potent to wake up. So maybe there's a thing after that.
Yeah.
But it was a little like, throwing a grenade into the group. But that's what he wanted to do was like shake them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you believe in empathy in design?
Say more about that.
It's because I don't think that we can actually empathize with something we haven't lived. I think it's at most sympathy. And sometimes we talk about designers having to be empathetic. And I don't think that especially because when we are talking about vulnerable communities or places that we don't even know, we come from a privileged place that we have absolutely never been into those people's shoes and we will never be. So for me, that's a hard, I don't really know if I believe that designers can actually put themselves in the place of someone else. I think that we can try our best and we can guard ourselves and include the community as much as we can. And part of our skills should be understanding how we can include more people into our work as designers.
Yeah.
I'm not a designer, but I sometimes do design as well with my team, as we all do. So yeah, for me, that's something that sometimes it's a lie I think we tell to designers that they can be empathetic, and I don't think that that's true. I think we have to be very aware of our biases, and that in its place cannot allow us to understand how that person feels or ever if we don't go through the same situation because we don't even have the same background,
Yeah, I would only nuance what you're saying, which is it's possible. Like you can be. But I think there's a laziness in that people think they are and they're not. They're really just sympathetic or well-intentioned, but unaware of all the things you just said. They're unaware of their privilege they're even naive to the otherness of themselves, which is unavoidable as any kind of researcher. Those issues, they don't know. So yes, I guess to some degree I agree with you. So with a lot of the city work, one of my favorite stories from another town was I showed up early. I moved there.
Where
I
was
moved
this?
to the town. It's in Florida. It's near Gainesville. It's another town near Gainesville. And it was lessons I learned about living.
Yeah.
So I moved in, I think in Gainesville, my teammate and I rented a house. Everyone thought we were a couple. And we just let them believe that for a while when we started the research and just did went to the bars and got our haircuts just to learn what's what.
Yeah.
Just enter into that. But we would say who we were, right? We're not unethical. But I remember one of the first moments where I arrived early in this town and it was Sunday and I was just walking around and I came across this guy. We were in a alley, sort of a gap between two buildings, and it was Sunday, so like no one was around. And he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, what are you doing here?" And he's like, "Do you live here?" And I'm like, I just moved, which is true. I just moved here. He's like, "Oh, me too." And I'm like, "Okay." And then he's like, "It's my birthday." I'm like, "Oh, that's great. It's your birthday." He's like, "Do you have any money?" I'm like, "Actually, no. But what do you need?" And then blah, blah, blah. And then we went for this like extremely long meandering walk around the town, which I knew the town already, having worked there before. Small town, super small town. And learned his story that he'd hitchhiked his way there, doing different jobs. And then I discovered that he was part of a illicit business, stealing, taking metal from construction sites and then selling it to recyclers. Wow. But I knew about it. I knew that was a thing. So he then was like curious, looking at me, being like, do you do that too? So it was ambiguous who I was. But throughout the project, and then I would see him around town. And he was a known guy in the town. And I would essentially be able to see the town through his eyes enough, and everyone else, like the city planner guy, so that I could see, how does the city planner look at him? How does the see him? And vice versa. So when we're designing anything, I'm aware of that's what it's going into.
And Scott, you also have an essay titled "Seeing Upside Down and Around Corners." Could you speak more of this essay, and how does this relate to skills that young people might need to deal with uncertain futures? What is it about?
Are you going to link to it?
I might.
If you want us to.
So there's the seeing upside down part comes from how to draw.
It's an interesting title, by the way. Seeing upside down and around corners. Yeah.
So there are two phrases. Seeing upside down comes from a book by Betty Edwards about how to draw. And learning how to draw involves learning how to see. And there's a Ways of Seeing John Berger book also, but it's not explicitly about drawing. It's just how to see the world. But you can't draw the world if you can't see the world. And so one of her exercises, which is, for anyone who's read the book, it's like one of the earlier ones. And you look at a line drawing from, I forget what, but of a guy sitting, or a figure sitting. But you, if this is where you're drawing, it's upside down. So all of the things that you might recognize, that those are your eyes, and eyes are this shape, and that's your nose, and that, like, your nose actually has no line. Your eyes have line, blah, blah, blah. But it's a line drawing, but because it's upside down, a lot of the features of the figure aren't obvious what they are. So then it's one of these early exercises and learning just to see things differently. There's another drawing called Blind Contour, which isn't so catchy of a title, but is around like drawing, just like you don't look at the page, you just look at what you're looking at. Around corners has to do with futures.
Okay.
So,
how so?
Around corners is the idea of there's the quote, like, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So being aware of the signals of change that are emerging or arriving where you are allows you, in a way, to see around corners. You see things that are coming before they arrive.
And how might young people relate to this if they want to understand how to change perspectives and then kind of like also predict in a way, or see what is coming for them?
Prediction's impossible. My advice for young people always is either fill a hole or create an opportunity. Fill a hole is like find a position in a company, or create an opportunity. In either case, I think it's like, what's something you're passionate about, a topic, and you're super curious and critically minded about it, and you know enough about it. Who's also working on it? Organizations, companies, whatever. And then what do they need from you? And become incredibly good at doing that and join them.
You know what? This is reminding me of a lunch we had a couple of years ago when we did post-its around creating these types of conversations. So these dots are connecting back to me. With this.
I probably asked you those kinds of questions.
This is coming back. Yeah, absolutely.
You were talking about curiosity for young people as well. You said that being curious also is something. And I think that one of the things that you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation is also understanding economics and understanding not just economics of business, but how these things work and legal systems as well. And I think that all ties back to something that for me made a huge change in my career, which was understanding systemic thinking. I think that that's something that architects have a lot, because you cannot do a house or cannot do even like a room without thinking about the whole system itself. So I think that lens is something that we miss sometimes in society, and especially in younger generations. Understanding, as you said, like even if I am doing something that's incremental, what are the other things around it that are going to be potentially impacted by? And how do I either work around it or with it, possibly and hopefully with it, to make it better. So, and then talking about technology and AI also, like how do you see even the architect and design role in general changing?
I think there's this simple mantra maybe of like always design something within the next larger context. So there's a Saarinen quote like design a chair within a room, within a house, within a city. But then I added within time.
Yeah.
So like what's the time of that thing that you're designing? And it was a kind of in the DNA at IDEO is like, where does this thing exist? So even if it was a product to be designed, where is it? And what journey is it part of for the person using it? So understanding that bigger context, maybe if you're still starting out, you at least can ask those things.
Yeah.
You probably cannot get permission to design them, but if you, by and large, if you have that insight to ask good questions, it usually will open trust to at least understand their impact on what it is you're doing. And clients will appreciate that that's going to help with the success of what it is you're doing, even if you don't address it at that time.
For sure. Scott, you also have a podcast called Possibility Hours, where you have different types of conversations with very interesting people. You are also exchanging superpowers and with people from here or from other different countries within your network or outside your network. So what is your podcast about, and how can someone learn to see opportunities when others see problems, especially now in these changing, very chaotic and certain times? What would be your take on that?
Well, okay, so Possibility Hours came from one of these communities.
Okay.
It was funny because I wanted to pair people from let's say, people who were acknowledged to have power and influence and those that were not. But they did, because I saw people follow them or believe them. So they have another kind of influence, but not one recognized by the official power, let's say. And so I paired them, and we had to figure out, what are we going to call this session that I'm going to facilitate? And in the moment, I'm like, it's Possibility Hours, because in the moment we're together, I wanted them to suspend the past and today, because then I would show them signals of change that were coming as a way for them to meet each other. And I just asked, how did you come to the table today? Which you can answer however you want. I took the bus, or I was born in Mississippi, whatever, whatever you want. And that reveals, where are you in that moment to share? So that was a cue to me. Where are you comfort-wise? Then I'd show the signals of change. And by and large, one of them would be a common, either they were excited about or not.
Yeah.
And then because of the term possibility, it was like, what would you like to discuss more? And in it, what is possible?
Yeah.
So knowing that everything's always evolving, and at this moment, everything seems static and like, oh, crap, not going to change. But actually, things are always changing.
Yeah.
Always. Our atoms are always moving. It's amazing. Like, you cut yourself and it repairs. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like wow. So if people realize it's not in there, as crappy and oppressive as something might be, something else it is possible. And I don't want to say that super naively, but like it might take a long time and a huge effort to undo. But over the course of history, some of these things get undone. There's a question of like, you know, do you think people are, what's that question of like, in the end, do you think people will do good or bad? I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm torn sometimes because I see so much bad.
Yeah.
I struggle. But this is a thing that made me realize part of design is you're a reluctant optimist. Because you always are imagining how things could be better.
A positive future, right?
Not just different.
But a better one, no?
Well, no. I mean, if a lot of architects were successful, then there'd be a lot of like horrible things were created. And thank God they weren't. So, you know.
I don't know. I always go back to Oscar Niemeyer in this case. You probably know the Brazilian architect and designer that designed a city that was supposed to be a city in the future thought for cars. And I just love that.
For example,
They thought that the future were cars. And I'm like, how? Why? Because it was what was thought of in the time being. So I agree with you, which is like, hopefully, but we will never know because there's the element of time. In which
Brasilia is a perfect example of like, no, maybe,
Maybe we took a wrong turn here.
Well, like they didn't really ask, like, is it legitimate that like so many people are going to have cars in that period of time? And then they didn't. And so now it's like colossal scale.
It is. It doesn't hold the complexity of a city anymore. The concept itself was very beautiful, but when you scale it, it was like, nope, I think we took a wrong turn.
And then bringing these experience that you've had with so many different perspectives and different paths, if you had to say something for people that want to make a difference beyond just making money, what unusual career path would you suggest to these people that are aware of what is going in the world and that they want to essentially see beyond their nose and create some sort of change?
There's I assume this is still online. There's I think this organization, I don't know if the organization's still going, Center for Urban Pedagogy, I believe in New York, CUP for short. They put out this wonderful brochure quite a while ago called Don't Be a Dick. And it's the story of these two guys. It's not quite clear if they're architects or designers per se. I mean, design and architecture is more or less a spectrum of things. And Dick is this high-minded, I know how to solve the world's problems neighbor. And then there's Richard, or Rich, is I just want to be involved in my neighborhood and understand what they need. And it's a short story of like both of them designing something for the neighborhood. And Dick presumes to know the problem, designs something and isn't adopted or isn't used in the way he anticipates, and he wonders why. And the other guy, doesn't need to be a guy, but is involved in the community, understands what they need, and then says, could it be like this? That kind of project, and then design something that's adopted and used and loved by, I don't know about love, but like something that solves a need.
The problem.
It doesn't have to solve a problem per se, but is something that is an opportunity. Like you can either solve a need or create an opportunity with your work. And so if you're doing one or the other of those, you need to understand something about your community if you want that to land in that way.
So your advice or your suggestion?
So my advice is like, you need to, again, it's this thing of like, in what context are you operating? And then who are you? If you're not thinking about who you're designing, okay, there's another realm in which you can operate, which is, I don't want to get into this what's art design thing, but like, there's perfectly legit, and I have an art practice too. Like, you can do that, and you can express and communicate all you want, like 100% also a path, right? Financially, well, depending on how you do it, can be as lucrative as anything. So in my mind, like the divisions, boundaries, whatnot around this are as blurry as ever. And how anyone wants to operate in the world, like Theaster Gates is like an awesome example. So architect, artist, creates these amazing neighborhood institutions, etc., operates in these different contexts, and
Spaces.
his work looks very different depending on, like if you see his artwork versus the architecture work, it's related, but I find him and a bunch of other people like that inspirational, because depending on what they're thinking about doing, wanting to engage, what they employ to do that looks really different. But they're for sure, without a doubt, having impact.
Nice. Thank you so much, Scott, for being here. We're going to wrap it up. You can find more about Scott's work in his newsletter, Field Report, and his podcast, Possibility Hours. Where can people find you?
I'm moving off of Instagram to Blue Sky.
Nice.
So you can go to possibilityhours.com or possibilityhours.substack. That's where the Field Report newsletter. Field Report's like a seeing upside down around corners kind of newsletter.
Nice.
Those might be the best starters.
Thank you so much for showing
Yeah.
us how we can work with cities and impact in those spaces, and for all of your years of experience in design. This is very nice.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Thank you for sharing your stories, and don't forget to follow us and share this episode with friends. We'll continue to have conversations with very inspiring people, listening to their stories, and remember, success isn't just about career achievements, but about finding meaningful meaning in all parts of life. Making an impact beyond profit isn't just a nice idea, it's necessary for a fairer future, and it's absolutely achievable. Thank you so much. Until the next time.
Bye.
Bye.